The Monkey was directed by Os Perkins and is based on a short story by Stephen King. The film stars Theo James, and a quick synopsis before I dive into a review is: when twin brothers find a mysterious wind-up monkey, a series of outrageous deaths tear their family apart. 25 years later, the monkey begins a new killing spree, forcing the estranged siblings to confront the cursed toy. Now, this is an interesting one, and I'll be straight off the bat, I really, really didn't like this film. And I think obviously when you first see something that you kind of have that much of a reaction to, I always go online and kind of find what's happening, and it feels like I'm not alone, but it feels like this is a very divisive film, and it's funny because Longlegs came out last year, which I gave a kind of okay review, but Longlegs never really shined for me, and I'm getting to the point now where I'm just starting to think maybe Osgood Perkins just isn't my director, because I'm now a few films in, and I'm still struggling to really enjoy what he does and his kind of style and his aesthetic, and I'm trying to work out now why I don't like his movies, because in many ways this film is nothing like Longlegs, and then Longlegs was nothing really like The Blackcoat's Daughter before that, but I just find every time that he really struggles to stick a landing, and there's just something about his characters which I find never seem to really match up to someone I would meet in real life or have any kind of of understanding or relation to. So obviously I'm going to get into why I didn't like it, and what I would say is my review is not going to be favourable, but there are lots of people on there who really are liking this film and really loving it, and that's fine. There's obviously something in it for people. I found the reaction to the cinema when I saw it quite muted, and I just thought when I came out, this is going to be unanimously bad, and it's not. So in the interest of kind of balance then, why don't I start out with the things that I actually liked about the film, and there were a few call outs. I will say that Osgood Perkins clearly knows how to shoot a film. So his films always have a really unusual, very dark aesthetic, and I think that's kind of what keeps bringing me back to his films. Is I love what he does in a sort of cinematography kind of perspective, and it makes me really want to like what he's doing. But I just always find that the sort of characters are lacking in that respect. But yeah, in this film, it has a really cool kind of crisp retro feel, albeit the film's set in 1999. I don't always feel that the aesthetic of the film looks like that. It looks like it's going for 70s, and I'm never quite sure whether he's trying to sort of set this film in a kind of nowhere time where, could be any decade within the last sort of 40, 50 years. But it did look good, and he knows how to shoot a film. He knows how to, the editing is very good. The soundtrack, kind of the way it builds is generally pretty good, although the pacing was very, very bad. And I'll come back to that shortly. I think in terms of a horror icon, the monkey toy. So in the film, it's this wind-up monkey, and when you kind of turn its key, its mouth opens and bares its teeth, and then it spins this little drumstick, and then it kind of bangs out a tune. And I thought that was really kind of iconic and actually looked really good. I assume it was a practical object that exists somewhere, and it's the sort of thing that I would probably absolutely go and buy if it was a decent bit of merch. And then just finally, I generally didn't like much of the casting in this. I thought a lot of the casting was either wasted or people just weren't in the right roles or were slightly miscast. And we'll get into that in my negatives. But Tatiana Maslany is always a joy to watch. I haven't seen all of Orphan Black, but she was the person that kept me going back to that. And again, I thought she was really interesting in this, very kind of sympathetic, but also quite sort of snarky in a kind of more fun way. And and without giving too much away, I just think it's a shame that she was only really in that sort of first half of the film when, the film is split into two halves. It's a kind of 1999 section, and then the characters grow up, and we're sort of watching it in the present day. So, in terms of why this film didn't work, I reviewed Heart Eyes last week, and I think I've spoken that about humour in horror films, and it's a very fine line for me. I found Heart Eyes to be really funny, but never sort of detracted from the horror, and I thought they worked really well in tandem together. They never undermined each other, and it really set out to be a rom-com with some really good kills, and I found it really successful in that respect. In the same way that I really didn't like It Chapter 2, and that came out about 6 years ago, this film just undermines itself with this constant snark. And I don't know, I've seen a few reviewers put it so well. It's like that friend who can't tell jokes very well, jabbing you in the ribs and sort of saying, "Oh, you know, did you get my joke? Did you get my joke?" And it's like, "No, I got your joke. I just didn't find it very funny." And there's something about the sort of the sensibility of this movie which I just found fell completely flat. And it started to creep in the first 10, 15 minutes. I just thought, I'm not going to like this. There's something not quite right. It's not for me about the jokes, the tone. If you've watched some of my videos, you'll know that I really hate the horror trope of every character's an asshole. And in this film, every character is a complete asshole. And it just doesn't make the film particularly fun to watch. It makes it very, very hard to really engage with any of the characters or really invest in anyone. And really, I mean, the main character himself, Theo James's character, is so kind of wet and doesn't really stand up to anything that I found that there was very much like little to invest in, because there was just no characters that were nice, or that it started to just feel very cartoonish. And I started to think, well, were you going for funny or were you going for scary? Because in my view, it kind of didn't really hit either. And in that respect, I think the kills, you'll hear a lot in this film about the kills, and I don't know, I think a lot of people like it as a Final Destination. I didn't find it like Final Destination at all. I think there were a couple of kills that, you know, thing happens, leads to this thing, which then ultimately kills this person. But the kills were quicker than that, and there was no tension behind any of them. They sort of just happened, and they were, again, very clearly played for a quick shock and a laugh, rather than building up a sense of danger or character or wondering what was going to happen. And again, the kills were so cartoonish that they were so bloody and gory, but not in a, I don't know what it is about this versus Terrifier that worked for me in Terrifier, but in this, every character felt so disposable. And I think, and the fact that they use CGI, that's probably the kind of the cut-off point for me, is because nothing ever felt organic or real. It always felt just, I don't know, it just felt a bit off. Like I wasn't really watching something happen. It was just, here's another kind of gory scenario. So I think the kills probably seems to be the thing that people are loving the most. It's actually the bit I could have found the weakest. And, you know, there was a trailer for Final Destination Bloodlines, which comes out in a few months' time. And I just think they are the masters of those kind of slow burn, tense, you know, how's this going to play out? There was no mystery in this film about how things were going to play out, because everything was so signposted. And then when it happened, there was kind of just no emotional reaction. And in fact, there's one particular death which actually isn't CGI blood, but without giving too much away, it's sort of CGI insects, and it's absolutely terrible. It looks awful. It's just a very strange moment in the film, which just, I just think, why did they make that choice? It was just very strange. I found that none of the characters actually felt like they knew each other. It goes back to my earlier point about sort of likability. It never felt like any of these people had a shared history or kind of were invested in each other. And, you know, you have these brother characters, and then 25 years later, their dynamic hasn't changed. The older bullying brother is still the older bullying brother, and it just doesn't ring true. Like, I just don't think that life is like that. And every character just seemed to be playing it for laughs. There was no, again, we'll go back to my earlier point, of just no real warmth or sense of why I cared about what happened to any of these people. And Cardinal Sin, and again, I'm really surprised how well this is done, because I can see why you might enjoy, like, maybe the first hour of this film. I still think the plot is meandering all over the place. But the last third, it's exactly like Longlegs. Like, it really does go to a really kind of just uninteresting place in terms of what happens to the characters. We end up on this typical, let's last third of the movie, let's go on a bit of a hunt. Let's go on a bit of a search for someone and have the big kind of denouement. But there was no payoff to it. Again, the character development was just so bad. There's this whole extra plot which kind of takes us away from the main action, which, frankly, you could have taken the whole lot out and it would have made no difference to the overall film. So there were kind of whole sections like that where it's like, what are we watching? Like, the dialogue is weird. Like, the characters are weird. Who wrote this script? And then who was able to get an actor to actually read the words out on screen? There's a whole cameo from Elijah Wood, which is just so bad. And for the set, that must have been a day's shoot for Elijah Wood. And granted, maybe he's friends with Os Perkins as the director, but that whole scene is just a microcosm of why this film doesn't work. It really thinks it's something, and it really does think it's really funny. So if you don't dial into the humour, and I just didn't, then that really will affect your enjoyment. And I found that in the cinema there were a couple of people like tittering and a couple of laughs, but the people I was with, and I wasn't with friends, I was on my own because that's what I do. I just found that people were like stone faced, and none of the shots were landing, either the laughs or the deaths and things like that. So yeah, I think Elijah Wood was wasted. The whole father-son dynamic between Theo James and his son Petey is just non-existent. Again, we're sort of supposed to believe that they only see each other once a year and they have a bit of a fractured relationship, but it feels like this is the first time they're meeting each other for the first time. And it's a completely pointless plot exercise of having this estranged dad-father relationship. Like, I would have preferred if the main character had grown up and, had a good life and had a family, and, you kind of cared and invested in, like, a wife or kids, or, it doesn't have to be a wife, could be a male partner, like anything to make us think, well, if this guy dies or if this guy loses family, then that's going to be actually something that's actually going to affect me. I thought Theo James was actually quite miscast in this. I think he's far too pretty for the fate of his character. It didn't ring true. There's this very handsome, very put together man, is a cashier in a supermarket, doesn't have any friends, is getting somehow divorced or separating from some model-like woman that, you think, well, how did you get with her in the first place? Why did you have a kid if the reason that you're not spending time with him is because you don't want to bring him harm? There were just too many of these moments where I didn't get it. Like, the link-ups didn't make sense. Things just occur, but you're like, but that doesn't make any sense. And like character dialogue decisions and some of the actions of characters, just think that just wouldn't play out like that. And that's my thing. I mean, I find it very hard to enjoy a film where that kind of logic leap is very big, because it just becomes a lot harder to enjoy. So yeah, in summary, I don't think this was funny enough to be a comedy, and I definitely don't think it was scary enough to be a horror. And I just think that's kind of the cardinal sin. Again, it goes back to chapter 2 of why that is still one of my most hated films, because any kind of scare or any kind of shock was always undermined by snark and cynicism, which it just wears you down in this film. I just thought, I don't care about anyone. And the actual ending itself, the very kind of last minute of this film is just so odd. And it seems like it was thrown in there as a bit of another oh, I'm very smart and I'm adding something in that you're not going to get. I didn't get it. From what I've seen online, people don't generally get what that last 5 minutes was about. And the whole thing just completely ends on a flat squib. So I've got to say, I'm really disappointed. I was really looking forward to it. I think it had a really good look to it, a really good aesthetic. And ultimately, I actually found it very obnoxious. And I got to the point where, this is the first time in a very long time where I could have walked out of the cinema a few times, because I was just willing it to end by the end. I really wasn't enjoying it. And it was something that crept up on me by that last half an hour. I was like, could I go? And it's only because of the fact that I have a review channel that I have to kind of see it through, that maybe I stayed for the whole thing. And I can't ever see myself wanting to revisit it. I found it quite a painful watch. Anyway, that's my view. As I said, this appears to be like Longlegs, like any kind of Os Perkins film, very, very divisive. This film will have people putting this at the top of its list. This will go firmly at the bottom of mine, I think, for 2025. This is a 4 out of 10 for me, and I think that's sometimes being generous. I really actively didn't like the experience of watching this film. And I think, having seen Companion, having seen Heart Eyes, there's really fun, really comedic horror that's played it so well so far this year. So this stuck out like a sore thumb. Anyway, thank you for watching. Continue to like and subscribe. And there's loads and more stuff coming up this year. It's actually been a pretty good year for horror so far in terms of releases. Not all hits, not all misses, not all hits. But we're getting a good steady stream. So I hope you will come back and see me at the next one.